Okay, here we'll talk briefly about the nature of bands, and we'll get a definition right up front. A band is a small, loosely organized, kin-ordered group that inhabits a specific territory. I want to point out also that all of our definitions of all the different types of political organization will be focused on territory. And that is because you can't organize a group, you can't maintain a group if you don't have territory. It's all based on subsistence. All of the subsistence strategies that we talked about before in the subsistence part of the lectures focus on territory because you need territory in order to produce food. Doesn't matter whether you're hunting and gathering or horticulturalists or agriculturalists or pastoralists, you need land. So all of the political organization, all the different forms of political organization are focused on the maintenance of territory. Bands are relatively small. They don't control a huge amount of territory, but it's large relative to the number of people who are on it. They don't live in very dense groups. It's loosely organized in the sense that it is the least organized of all of the types of political organization that we're going to talk about. There are the fewest rules, although there still are constraints. We'll see that there are rules. Most of their world is organized in terms of kinship. They don't really know what to do with people that they're not related to. So we'll definitely talk about that, but it'll probably come up in other contexts as well. That's an important feature of the way that they live. So a band is a small, loosely organized, kin-ordered group that inhabits a specific territory. Social structure in bands. Basically, everything that we said about bands is also true of hunters and gatherers, with a couple of small exceptions. Most hunting and gathering groups are organized in bands, almost all of them. We're going to read about one exception in the readings for this section. So band-level societies, everything we said about hunter-gatherers is true of them. They're small groups, relatively small, between 50 and 300 people. 50 is the lower margin for the group. 300 is the highest. That means in the most forgiving environments, the ones with the most food available, they can generally only support around 300 people. And 50 is the minimum threshold, which is a matter of security overall. If you have a smaller group than 50, then there's too high a chance that too many people will be affected by injuries, disease. They won't be able to compete with neighboring groups because there is often warfare that goes on between the different groups, and usually that's sorted out in terms of the size of the groups. I mean, larger groups will beat smaller groups, period. That's pretty much how it goes. So if you have too small a group, then you're exposed to way too much risk, and eventually something's going to go wrong and your group will probably cease to exist. So 50 is the lower threshold. 300 is the higher threshold. That's based on carrying capacity given the strategy for survival. If they're hunting and gathering, they can only control so much land, and on the land that they can comfortably control with that level of organization, they can only feed about 300 people. Obviously, if you're living in a town with 50 to 300 people in it, then everybody's going to know each other. So it's a small group. If you think about our class when we were actually meeting, well, it doesn't work as well this semester because I have two different classes, and the smaller of the two is about 25, so that's half as many people. Often I have classes that are 50. One of the groups is 50. And so if you look around the room, you can see how few people that really is and how easy it would be to get to know all of them. If anybody ever lived in a small town, they understand probably a small town for us is 2,000 to 5,000 people, right? And even in a town of 2,000, you're probably going to know everybody for the most part. So those people, they know each other. They are also related to each other. Bear in mind, they're not necessarily part of a globalist system where they can, or even a national system where they can move freely and intermingle with other groups. They're all related to each other. They're staying pretty much tied to the land that they're on, and they do have an incest taboo in the groups. This is need to avoid marrying people who are too closely biologically related to you. People may not always have the same idea of how biology works, but they all have ideas of things that should be avoided, so they all maintain a universal incest taboo. Excuse me. And in these groups that's especially important. So they practice something called exogamy. Not sure if that term's come up before in the class, but exogamy is spelled E-X-O-G-A-M-Y. E-X-O-G-A-M-Y. And that is a practice of marrying outside of your social group. Right, so they have, in almost all band-level societies, they're small, they're all related to each other, they all know each other, and they practice exogamy, meaning they have to marry into groups outside of their own. And that is to avoid an incest taboo. We have to the right, let me get the animations up here, they're coming up in the wrong order for some reason. This chart to the right is what's called a kinship diagram, or a kinship chart. And it uses the standard notation that's used in anthropology when explaining kinship relations in a group. And this was a huge focus in anthropology for decades, really. Anthropologists in the United States, in Europe as well, were really focused on kinship because they thought that it was so much the center of the worlds of many of the people that they were studying. They thought that if they unlocked the secrets of their kinship structure, they could understand many other parts of their society. So there was a period of time when it was absolutely obligatory that you were doing kinship studies. If you recall Napoleon Chagnon's work from the methods section, he was doing kinships. He was charting genealogies of the people. And during the time when he was doing that work, that was really the top priority. Everybody was trying to chart genealogies. So this is the standard notation that is used to keep track of people's genealogical relationships. Right? It's called a kinship chart or a kinship diagram. The symbol key is down at the bottom here. An equal sign is used to indicate a marriage or pairing that results in children. Triangles are used to indicate male members of the group, and circles are used to represent female members of the group. You'll notice that on these charts there's always an ego designated, ego, which I've circled in the center of the chart here. Ego is the person that the diagram is about. Right? So if you don't do that, if you don't designate an ego, then all of the relationships change every time you start talking about another person. If you're talking about this person as ego, the person that the chart is about, then they have a clear relationship to the other people in the chart, which is not going to change. For example, this ego is the square doesn't specify male or female. It would be specified elsewhere if they used a square. Just happens to be a square on this example. We'll say it's male, just for example. Ego is the son of this pairing, right? So that would be ego's father, and that would be ego's mother. Right? There's the equal sign, that's the marriage. The lines coming down represent the children from that marriage, and lateral lines indicate siblings. So this would be ego's sister, and this would be ego's brother. Okay. We don't have a marriage to show with ego, but we do know that ego had children from this chart. So ego had a son and a daughter. All right. So often in class I'll walk through these different examples and they come up as animations so people can work out the things themselves and get a little practice with it. And for now I'll just walk right through them. Number one is ego's paternal grandfather. And we can figure that out by just tracing it back. That's ego's father, so it's on his father's side. That's what paternal means. And it's ego's father's father. Right, if we trace the lines back to the equals. Number two, this person over here is going to be ego's first cousin. And first cousins, we probably all are familiar with that terminology. That's going to be the child of your parent's sibling, right? So ego's father had a sister who was his aunt. She had a kid, and a daughter in this case, who was his first cousin. Right, in the same generation, and their parents were siblings. Okay. Number three, her relationship to ego is first cousin once removed, because he's still part of the previous generation. Ego and her, number three's mother, were first cousins. So that's their closest relationship, first cousin, and it's once removed because she's the next generation. In this case, this is not a daughter of the female cousin, it's a daughter of the male cousin, but a cousin nonetheless, first cousin nonetheless. So that's what once removed means. Probably people have heard that, didn't necessarily know what it meant. First cousins are in the same generation. Their parents were siblings. First cousin once removed means that we're one generation off. Right? Now, if ego had a child, which is represented by the X in this case, that would be a second cousin to number 3. Right? So first cousin once removed, if the older first cousin once removed has a child, then the children are second cousins. So those are some terms that you probably have heard. Hopefully that clarifies them a little bit. This is just a first exposure. Later on we're going to talk about kinship at length in another lecture, and so we'll get into that in more detail. Okay, so they're small. Everybody knows each other. Everybody's related to each other. If you ask anybody in the group, they can probably trace all the relationships. They can work out their own family details. There may be some people that they know they're related to, but they're not entirely sure, particularly if they're younger members of the group. If you find an older person in the group, particularly older women, usually know every single detail of every relationship in band level societies. Of course, we're going to have a common ethnicity, and by that I mean, by common in this case means a single ethnicity. They're all part of the same ethnicity. Ethnicity isn't something that becomes important until more complex forms of organization with larger groups of people. Alright, so in this case, of course, they're all going to be of a common ethnicity. They're all related to each other in the same place. Social stratification is going to be basically absent. There will be no social stratification to speak of. They are egalitarian groups. We talked about this when we talked about hunting and gathering. We said that they were generally egalitarian and that no person had any more power, wealth, or prestige than anybody else. We said that they were sexually egalitarian and that neither men nor women had more power than the other sex. And we also said that they had a sexual division of labor, meaning men and women did different things. Right, so there is no social stratification to speak of in band level societies. If there is, it's unusual. We did talk about one example among people who live in the Arctic, where there is some rudimentary social stratification. People have to organize a little bit more because of the difficulty of the circumstances. But that's again an exception, not the rule. And we're talking about a broader model. Right? So we're going to see a fair number of groups that have some deviations from this this basic structure. Right? Oh yeah, second cousins. Economy and bands. We already talked about this at length in the subsistence section. So you can refer back to that if you are forgetting anything. Their basic subsistence strategy is obviously food foraging or hunting and gathering. They rely on wild foods for their survival. You may see some groups that still are organized as bands that are in transition to horticulture. We did see that in the horticulture video in the previous section. It was a group that was primarily hunting and gathering, the Waorani in the Amazon basin. And so they were still mobile, they were nomadic, they were moving through the jungle, collecting wild plants and animals, and they were beginning to control their food supply. So you may see groups like that are still organized as bands. In terms of distribution, food sharing is common in band level societies. We talked about that. Food sharing is a system of rules for distributing the food that you procure. We already talked about that a number of times. We used the image of the whale that was cut up and divided up for distribution to illustrate food sharing. Right, so in all these groups, they have a food sharing system that's based on mutual obligation. Right, people in the group will help each other at various points throughout their lives, and so that's the natural thing to do. You have a set of rules. If you get enough food for yourself, and no more, then you keep it for yourself, right? If you get any more, it goes to your immediate family, and then your extended family, and anybody else you owe debts to. And by that means, no matter how lucky or unlucky people are, everybody gets something to eat as a rule, as long as they maintain relationships within the group, which you really have no choice but to do. Reciprocity, all the different sorts of reciprocity that we talked about in the economics lecture are not necessarily present in bands. We do see generalized reciprocity, of which food sharing is a form, as the dominant mode. Right, so that's exchange without a specified time or amount of repayment, and they don't have to specify those things because They have what's called mechanical solidarity. They are interdependent to such a degree that nobody can really break out of those relationships. So we'll see some discussion of that in other. Keep an eye out for that in readings that we have assigned for this section. This reading by Susan Parman, where she discusses that. Not in reference to hunter-gatherers necessarily, but she discusses that basic idea of small groups having interdependence on one another and the inability to break out of those relationships, even if you wanted to. In terms of material culture, everything was associated with hunter-gatherers, associated with bands. They have portable material culture. All of this stuff can be moved easily or left where it is. And they're not going to carry a bunch of stuff because carrying stuff burns calories. They'll just make a new one or find a new one wherever they go. No permanent structures as a rule. We talked about site furniture in the past. Large things like hearth features that they can leave in sites that they know they're going to revisit. But as a rule, they don't build permanent structures. They build temporary ones and rebuild them if they still are partly in shape when they get back to the same spot. Otherwise, they just plan to build a new house. Moving on, politics and bands. There really is no government. We call them acephalous at the beginning of the lecture. They don't have what we would consider to be a government. There's nobody in charge. They may have what's called a headman. Headman is just somebody who has a certain amount of prestige in the group. There are slight differentials in prestige, which you'll recall from the economics lecture, is the respect given to an individual by his or her peers. So the headman has a position that's totally based on prestige. It can change from day to day. It's just based on whether other people respect that individual. So it's usually is a man, usually is an older, respected person who has a lot of experience and has a decent personality, is easy to get along with, makes good decisions, has good personal characteristics. And that's pretty much what that position is based on. It's just the person that people tend to go to for advice. They tend to trust that person's judgment. Decision-making is also egalitarian. There's a goal of consensus in making any decisions, and the primary goal is to get things done that need to be done without causing undue hostility within the group. The last thing that they want to do is fragment the group, because fragmenting the group reduces their chances of overall success, because they are so interdependent on one another. If they have groups, if you think about what their options are in these groups, they really don't have any place to go. It's like say you're born in a small town, you go to kindergarten with a bunch of people, and those are the people you're with the rest of your life, right? You're never going to be away from those people. So you really don't want to have some of them get upset. There's a goal of consensus, and consensus, sometimes people get confused on that point. It means literally that everybody has to agree. Consensus means you have no dissenting opinions. Nobody is against whatever the decision is. That's consensus. In the United States, we tend not to really focus on consensus as a goal because we have a large society with a diverse group of people, and it's a democratic system. It's a democratic republic. We are fully okay with the idea that 49% of the people are going to be irritated half the time. That's sort of built into the system. There's a built-in space for dissent. That's not really true in bands. They're so small, everybody's related, everybody has similar goals, there's not really room for dissent. To put this in perspective, you can think about some of the circumstances in which we do have room for, do try to seek a consensus. One example that I frequently use in class, and I usually get people to think about it a little bit, and we walk through examples. But one example that usually comes up, if it doesn't, I bring it up, is inside your own family. We want to reach a consensus rather than just make decisions based on a majority. If you think about a family, talking about going on vacation, and you got 4 people in the family, the father and the 2 kids all vote to go to the Grand Canyon, and mom doesn't want to go. Well, do you tell mom she's outvoted and we're going anyway? No, you probably don't. And the reason is mom's not going away. She doesn't want to go to the Grand Canyon. You're probably going to hear about that over and over for a long period of time, or any member of the group, really. I mean to pick on mom specifically, but everybody knows you want to get everybody on the same page, otherwise it's going to be miserable because nobody's going anywhere. You're going to have to deal with the same people indefinitely. Also, it's a small number of people with common interests, so it's easier to achieve a consensus as a rule. Same is true of bands. Think of it as dealing within a family structure. So the goal is always consensus. Everybody gets a say. That's the egalitarian part. They weigh everybody's opinion equally and try to get everybody on the same page. That's the goal. In terms of conflict resolution, it is very much the same as decision-making process. Everything is informally done. Everything is personal. There are no abstract rules. That was the definition of a law, by the way. Laws are abstract rules that apply to everyone equally. All right, or they're meant to apply to everyone equally, at least. Conflict resolution in this case, if you think about it, there's no authority. There's nobody in charge. There's no governor, no president, no police station, no jail, nothing. All right, you have to rely on the judgment of the group. If you have a headman in the group, that person may serve as a mediator, but their role will mostly be to smooth things over and come to a decision that everybody is happy with, not to impose any kind of a resolution on anyone. If you think about the possibilities, suppose somebody were doing something really horrendous and everybody could agree that they can't be dealt with anymore, what are your options? No police to call, there's no court system, there's nothing like that. You're living in a jungle or a desert or some other place, and there's no place for them to go. So what are your options? You can kick them out of the group, which often is a death sentence pretty much. They're probably not going to survive. Eventually something's going to happen. They'll sprain an ankle or get sick or something, and they won't be able to survive. Nobody else, without anybody else helping them. You could kill them outright. You could banish them or you could kill them. Those are the two major options. The other possibility is if they were banished, they could potentially survive with another group. And there's a reason that they might be able to be taken in by another group because of that practice of exogamy. If you recall that, we mentioned it earlier. In this lecture, exogamy was the practice of marrying outside of your social group. And in order to avoid the incest taboo, in these groups, they have a practice of doing that. Right. So basically, they have relatives in all of the neighboring groups. They're not just one group in the middle of the jungle with nobody else around them. They have other groups around them, and there may be hostilities between the groups, but still they marry across those group boundaries. Right. So you may have relatives. You will have relatives in all of the other bands around you, most likely. So if you do get exiled and you manage to talk your way into one of those groups, maybe they just hate the other group and you have a really good relationship with the people that you know over there, and so they'll take you in. That's really your only shot. Most likely, though, they'll know whatever you did to get kicked out of that other group, because it has to be pretty extreme. You have to be a serious danger to the group for them to make a decision like that. They don't take that lightly. They also have to have they have to have consensus in order to punish somebody like that. If they're going to kill somebody in the group, they better have consensus, because if they don't, what's going to happen is all that other person's closer family is going to come after you, right? That's the worst thing that can happen to one of these groups. It damages the overall effectiveness of the group, but it leaves them open to attack from the outside, right? If they're fighting internally and people are getting killed, particularly the adult men who do most of the fighting, are getting killed off, then that reduces their military strength relative to, and I use that term loosely, relative to the neighboring groups. We're talking about bands of men who get spears and attack the other groups, and that's something that we've seen in the very first reading that we did with the Shagnon. There's one of those raids that was going on, and those were not, I can't say those were uncommon among most hunting and gathering people. That is something that happened with some sort of regularity. In some groups, the rate of death by spear injury was something in the neighborhood of 70% or more in hunting and gathering groups. That's not all of them, but there was a high prevalence of violence. What there was not was organized warfare. All right. We'll talk much more about that later. We've already talked about specialized labor, which allows people to have jobs that are not directly related to subsistence, and it's not until we have specialized labor that we can have organized warfare. For now, there's a hard constraint on any warfare that can go on in that everybody has to get their own food. Right, so you can't have a war that drags on for more than a few days because people will start to starve to death. Right? And you can't do that. You can't fight a war if you don't have supplies, basically. So that's a hard limiting factor in terms of war. But anyway, violence does go on. It is limited in those circumstances, but it is also prevalent. That's the end of the band section. Next will be tribes, which is also an acephalous group.